Well, hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm waiting for Dee Pierce to arrive. We had a bit of a technical problem. She was in a few minutes ago. Then I realized I had the wrong studio room up, and I went to the right one and sent her the link, but she hasn't appeared yet. So I'm expecting her to join me any minute. But for now, our topics for tonight are at least our title for tonight is War with Yemen, Iran, and question mark. And our topics for tonight, I don't know why they're not in the usual place, but our topics for tonight are Trump, Putin, on their negotiations in the face of attacks on Yemen and threats to Iran, intel and war with Iran, why would the United States fight with Yemen, and then Pepe Escobar, in Yemen. And still waiting for D. Let's see who's here. Nobody is declaring themselves quite yet. Anyway, I'm going to start our first topic with a piece from Alistair Crook. This piece was from the UN's review, stated March 24th. And it says, Trump and Putin begin addressing accumulated geostrategic debris amidst Trump's ultimatum to Iran. Before I go on with this, I will let Dee in. She has arrived. Well, once again, hello, Dee.
Hello.
Things are a little strange tonight. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, did you share? Did you start sharing yet?
No, we have to start sharing now. Okay, so we will share now.
Okay.
And announce ourselves.
Okay, go over to Facebook.
Okay, great to have you here, Dee.
Yes, good to be here, Joe. Yep, it's always something.
It's always something. For some reason, the colors on our names have changed too.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that either.
I have to debug that. I don't know what's happened here.
Okay. sharing is caring, right, Joe? Letting everybody know we're here.
And caring is sharing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so cool.
Messenger here.
So, when you popped in, I had just started with an Alistair Crook piece from a
Okay.
Yemen's Review called Trump and Putin Begin Addressing Cumulative Geostrategic Debris um,
Okay.
um, 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 amidst Trump's ultimatum to Iran. That made no
Okay.
sense, did it?
No.
No sense at all. Here he is, President Trump, and there he is, the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Yes. Oh, hello, Evelyn is here, and Earl of Lurl is here.
Oh, good. That's good. Very good. Does Trump see Iran through some disturbed optic that in destroying Iran, he is bringing about peace through strength?
Oh,
I
I
don't
don't know what the hell he's thinking.
I don't know what the hell he's doing, but that's an interesting question posed by
Yeah.
Alistair. The phone call, excuse me, on the 18th of March between Presidents Trump and Putin has happened. It was a success insofar as it allowed both sides to label the result as, quote, positive, unquote. And it did not lead to a breakdown by virtue of the smallest concessions from Putin and energy infrastructure truths. Something easily it could have done, i.e., devolved into impasse with Trump excoriating Putin, as he has done to Zelensky, given the fantastical and unrealistic expectations being woven in the West that this would be the, quote, decider, unquote, meeting for a final division of Ukraine. Excuse me again. It may have been a success too, insofar as it has laid the groundwork for the absent homework, now to be handled, by two teams of experts on the detailed mechanics of the ceasefire. It was always a puzzle why this had not been earlier tackled by the U.S. team in Riyadh, on lack of experience. It was, after all, because the ceasefire was treated as a self-creating entity by virtue of an American signature. Had Western expectations took flight in the belief that details did not matter, all that remained to do in this flawed estimation was to, quote, divvy out the cake, unquote.
Ay,
Aye, aye, aye. Until the mechanics of a ceasefire, which must be comprehensive since ceasefires almost always break down. There was little to discuss on that topic on Tuesday. That was last Tuesday, of course. Predictably, then, discussion reportedly seemed to have turned to other issues, mainly economic ones, and Iran, underlining again that the negotiation process between the U.S. and Russia does not boil down to just Ukraine. So, how to move to ceasefire and implementation. Ceasefire implementation. Simple. Begin to unravel the, quote, cat's cradle, unquote, of impedimenta blocking normalized relations. Putin plugging out just one strand to this problem. Observe that, quote, sanctions alone are neither temporary nor targeted measures. They constitute rather a mechanism of systemic strategic pressure against our nation. Our competitors perpetually seek to constrain Russia and diminish its economic and technological capacities. They churn out these packages incessantly, unquote. There is thus much accumulated geostrategic debris to be addressed and corrected, dating back many years before a big picture normalization can start in earnest. What is apparent is that while Trump seems to be in a tearing hurry, Putin, by contrast, is not. And he will not be rushed. His own constituency will not countenance a hastily funged accord with the U.S. that later implodes amidst recriminations of deceit and of Moscow again having been fooled by the West. Russian blood is this invested in this strategic normalization process? It needs to work. What is behind Trump's evident hurry? Is it the need for breakneck speed on the domestic front to push ahead before the accumulated forces of the opposition in the U.S. plus their brethren in Europe have the time to regroup and to torpedo normalization with Russia? Or does Trump fear that a long gap before ceasefire implementation will enable opposition forces to push for the recommencement of arms supplies and intelligence sharing as the Russian military steamroller continues its advance? Is the fear, as Steve Bannon has warned, that by rearming Ukraine, Trump effectively, quote, own, unquote, the war and shoulder the blame for a massive Western and NATO defeat? Or perhaps Trump anticipates that Kyiv might unexpectedly cascade into a systemic collapse, as occurred to the Karzai government in Afghanistan. Trump is acutely aware of the political disaster that befell Biden, from the images of Afghans clinging to the tires of departing U.S. transport planes a la Vietnam, as the U.S. evacuated the country. Yet again, it might be something different. I learned from my time facilitating ceasefires in Palestine, Israel, that it is not possible to make a ceasefire in one place, say Bethlehem, whilst Israeli forces were concurrently setting Nablus or Jenin ablaze. The emotional contagion and anger from one conflict cannot be contained to one locality. It would overflow to the other. It was tried. The one contaminated the implied sincere intentions behind the other. Is the reason for the Trump haste mainly that he suspects his unconstrained support for Israel eventually will lead him to embrace major war in the Middle East? The world of today, thanks to the internet, is much smaller than before. Is it possible to be a, quote, peacemaker, unquote, and a, quote, war maker, unquote, simultaneously and have the first taken seriously? Trump and those politicians, quote, owned by the pro-Israeli lobby, know that Netanyahu and Al want the U.S. to help eliminate Israel's regional rival, Iran. Trump cannot both retrench the U.S. as a Western Hemisphere culture of influence, yet continue to throw the U.S. weight around as world hegemon, causing the U.S. government to go broke. Well, the U.S. government can't go broke, but that's another issue. Can Trump successfully retrench the U.S. to fortress America, or will foreign entanglements, i.e. an unstable Israel, lead to war and derail Trump's administration as all is intertwined? Another good question from Alistair. What is Trump's vision for the Middle East? Certainly he has one. It is one that is rooted in his unstinting allegiance to the Israeli interest. The plan is either to destroy Iran financially or to decapitate it and empower a greater Israel. Let's repeat that. The plan is either to destroy Iran financially or to decapitate it and empower a greater Israel. Neither of those two things is something the Russians favor, Putin favors, or China favors, or China's interested in. We've got to keep that in mind. Going back to the article, Trump's letter to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, included a 2-month deadline for reaching a new nuclear deal. The day after his missive, Trump said the U.S. is, quote, down to the final moments, unquote, with Iran. Quote, we can't let them have nuclear weapons. Something is going to happen very soon. I would rather have a peace deal than the other option, but the other option will solve the problem, unquote. Well, I doubt it will solve the problem, but okay, I also have to question, why can't we let them have a nuclear weapon? We let Israel have a nuclear weapon. We let Pakistan have a nuclear weapon. We let North Korea have a nuclear weapon. We let Britain have a nuclear weapon. We let France have a nuclear weapon. We let Russia have a nuclear weapon. Why can't we let Iran have a nuclear weapon? What, after all, is the big deal? Anyway, U.S. journalist Ken Klippenstein has noted that on the 28th of February, 2 B-52 bombers flying from Qatar dropped bombs on an undisclosed location, specifically Iraq. These nuclear-capable bombers were carrying a message whose recipient, quote, was clear as day, the Islamic Republic of Iran, unquote. Why B-52s and not F-35s, which can carry bombs? Because, quote, bunker buster bombs are too heavy for F-35s. Israel has F-35s, but does not have B-52 heavy bombers. I have to add a thought to that particular paragraph. F-35s, even though they might not be able even though they may not be able to carry the bunker buster bombs, which are too heavy for them, what about these light forms of nuclear weapons that were developed during the first of the Trump administrations? I think they're known as gravity bombs. They're bombs that have tremendous stopping power, but I understand are limited in the radiation they carry with them. Are those too heavy for the F-35s? I'm not too sure. I'm just raising the question. Then on 9th of March, Klippenstein writes, a second demonstration was made. B-52s flew alongside Israeli fighter jets on long-range missions, practicing aerial refueling operations. The Israeli press correctly reported the real purpose of the operation, readying the Israeli military for a potential joint strike with the U.S. on Iran, unquote. Then last Sunday, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz boasted that multiple Anglo-U.S. airstrikes took out top Houthi officials making it very clear that this is all about Iran. Quote, this was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. And the difference here is one, going after the Houthi leadership, and two, holding Iran responsible. That's what Mike Waltz had to say anyway. I have no idea whether he knows what he's talking about. I accept the targeting. I don't necessarily accept they took any important Houthi leaders out. Seem to have noticed, that Yahya Saree is still perfectly intact, and as we'll see in the Pepe Escobar video we'll do later, he seems to have been introduced to Pepe Escobar and his independent press colleagues from other countries. Anyway, Marco Rubio elaborated on CBS, quote, we're doing the entire world a favor by getting rid of these guys, unquote. I'm not going to add the unthinkable to that particular line. I'll allow you to guess what that unthinkable is. Trump then followed up with the same theme. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran. And Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire, unquote. In a further piece, Klippenstein writes, boy, he's reading Ken Klippenstein, isn't he? Quote, Trump's menu of options for dealing with terror now includes one he didn't have in his first term, full-scale war, with, quote, nuclear weapons on the table. And then he mentions the Trident II low-yield option. So again, I raise the question, why couldn't those particular kinds of nuclear weapons be carried by F-35s? Just saying. Pentagon and company contracting documents I've obtained described, quote, a unique joint staff planning, unquote, effort underway in Washington and in the Middle East to refine the new next generation of, quote, a major regional conflict with Iran. The plans are the result of a reassessment of Iran's military capabilities, as well as a fundamental shift in how America conducts war, unquote. What is new is that the multilateral component includes Israel working in unison with Arab Gulf partners for the first time, either indirectly or directly. Now, that is, I think, a very important statement from Alistair. Can the Arab Gulf partners be counted upon to attack Iran? I don't know. That would not look too good from the standpoint of BRICS. I mean, the United States is acting some of the Arab Gulf partners who are members of BRICS to attack another BRICS partner, specifically Iran. There may be a problem with that. The plan also includes many contingencies and levels of war, according to the documents cited by Klippenstein, from, quote, crisis action, unquote, meaning response to events and attacks, to, quote, deliberate, unquote, planning, which refers to set scenarios that flow from crises that escalate out of control. Excuse me. One document warns of the, quote, distinct possibility of the war escalating outside of the U.S. government's intention, unquote, and impacting the rest of the region, demanding a multifaceted approach. War preparations for Iran are so closely restricted that even contracting companies involved in war plannings are prohibited from even mentioning unclassified portions, noted Klippenstein. Quote, while a range of military options are often provided to presidents in an attempt on the part of the Pentagon to steer the president to the one favored by the Pentagon, Trump already has shown his proclivity to select the most provocative option, unquote. And quote again, equally, Trump's green light for the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, killing hundreds last Monday, but ostensibly targeted on the Hamas leadership, can be seen as consonant with the pattern of taking the belligerent option, unquote. Following his successful assassination of Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, in 2020, Trump seems to have taken the lesson that aggressive activism is relatively cost-free. Klippenstein notes. As Waltz noted in his press interview, the difference is these attacks on Yemen were not pinpricks back and forth, what ultimately proved to be feckless attacks. This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. By the way, just as a footnote to that, there's a YouTube I noticed today that said that Houthi missiles were in the process of destroying Mossad headquarters in Israel. I don't know about the details of that, but if it's true that's what's going on, then that's very interesting in the context of this overwhelming response that targeted Houthi leaders and took them out. Of course, both could be true, but since the attacks by the administration, it seems like the Houthis have just gotten more aggressive. Klippenstein cautions that, quote, 2024 may be behind us, but its lessons aren't. Israel's assassination of top Hezbollah officials in Lebanon was largely perceived by Washington to be a resounding success with few downsides. Trump likely took back the same message, leading to its strike on the Houthi leadership this week. If Western observers are seeing all of what's going on as some repeat of Biden's tit-for-tat or limited attacks by Israel on Iran's early warning and air defenses, they may be misunderstanding what's going on behind the scenes. What Trump might now do, what is right out of the Israeli playbook, would be to attack Iran's command and control, including the leadership of Iran. This very certainly would have a profound effect on Trump's relations with Russia and China. It could eviscerate any sense in Moscow and Beijing that Trump is agreement capable. What price then his, quote, peacemaker, unquote, quote, big picture, unquote, reset were he, in the wake of wars of Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, to start a war with Iran? Does Trump see Iran through some disturbed optic that in destroying Iran, he is bringing about peace through strength? Another very excellent question from Alistair. So, Dee, any comments, questions, opinions?
Not right now.
Okay.
You have some comments here.
I do have lots of comments. Evelina says hello, And the Earl of Lurl says, hi. Oh, by the way, where's my normal background for this?
I don't know. Everything's changed.
Things have changed. That's very strange. Where's my bloody background? I just noticed everything looks so dark. Let me see if I can do something about that right now. Hey!
Oh, cool.
Back to the comments. Now I feel more comfortable. That was a background actually provided by Fran Bauer.
Oh, okay.
So the Earl of Earl says, hi guys. Joe Logan says, how come I don't have a share button? You got me. I don't know. I didn't know. Was there something wrong with the share button on Facebook?
No.
I was able to share.
Well, sometimes, Facebook's been acting weird anyway. So it comes and goes.
Joe says, all of a sudden I have a share button. Weird. Evelyn says, Trump can forget about Iran if he wants to deal with Russia. He can also forget about winning a war if he wants to target Iran. Although messing with Iran can complicate things for Israel. Certainly can. If Trump takes out Iran, if he were successful in taking out Iran, what would be there to stop Putin's retaliating by taking out Israel?
Yeah.
And how would Trump feel about that? Joe Logan says, hello, people. Trump is bullshit just like all politicians. They ain't going to launch nuclear weapons. Everyone will die. It's a bullshit circle jerk show. And you shouldn't believe any of it. Joe, you're smart, so you should know. Well, it's the low yield ones. He wants to proceed with the low yield ones. So, of course, he'll say, well, they were low yield weapons we used to get at the underground cities of Iran and their missile assets. This is not a general nuclear war scenario. That's what Trump will say. So what will Putin say in return? He will say, oh, we understand they're limited in their yield and limited in their radiation. So therefore, we're going to reply with Oreshniks. How do you like those apples? That also would finish Israel. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody. Joe Logan says, it's a bullshit circle jerk show. People that supposedly got killed are not dead. They're creating fear to cause you to be more obedient.
Basically, that's what they do.
Evelina says, I agree, but Dr. Joe has to assume the possibility. I have to recognize the possibility. Joe Logan says, Iran is not a country to fuck with.
No.
I completely agree, Joe. I certainly don't think they are. Sherry says, hi, everyone. Earl says, hi, Steve. Earl says, hi, Sherry. So let's go on to the next piece.
Okay.
This is the video between Alistair Crook and Judge Napolitano.
4% to a record high. If that
Sorry, it's not quite the start. I usually get to skip the ads. There we are. I guess I'm not quite there yet.
For anyone with dementia, do not drink warm water. Did you know that memory loss is not a condition of the mind?
killing of civilians in Yemen last.
Okay. So we're there now. This has the same title as the article we just went through, but I think the content is somewhat different and worth going through. Oh, gee. Back to that gold ad. Here we go.
And tell them the judge sent you.
Right. Here we go.
Hi there, Alistair. Welcome here, my dear friend. I don't know if you hear the echo that I do, but the StreamYard is acting up a little bit. Is the United States safer or stronger today because of all the bombing and killing of civilians in Yemen last week?
Oh, definitely less strong. But we have to understand exactly what is going on, because the bombing in Yemen is totally tied to the question of an attack on Iran. It was made very clear by Mike Waltz just last Sunday, when that was just after multiple airstrikes, that, as he put it, taken out top Houthi officials, making very clear that this was all about Iran, and that's what he said at the time. This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. And the difference here, and I'm underlining this because this is the new policy that is clearly coming out of Washington. And the difference here is, one, going after the Houthi leadership, and two, holding Iran responsible. So effectively,
Two very important points, okay, by Alistair, that I don't know if those two came clear, okay, in the article. They were in the article, but not as emphatic.
America is not any safer, because what we are doing is setting up, if you like, the context and the platform for a strike on Iran. And of course, it's no coincidence when he talks about having gone after the Houthi leadership, because the idea that Israel was so successful in killing the Hezbollah leadership has a stronghold in segments of Washington, that they believe, this is the new answer. We don't have to destroy the oil, the gas capacities of Iran. We don't have to destroy the nuclear one. We can decapitate Iran. And having decapitated it, they feel it could be just like Syria. Syria is the other model that has an important impact on the consciousness of Washington at the moment. Look, there was no revolution. There was nothing happened. The HTS, led by Jolani, just walked in and the shop was empty, unlocked, abandoned. They were free to just go in and take it. And I think there is still that sort of sense in Washington that Iran could be, the next Syria. That could be that this longed for, uprising by the Iranian people, that Washington seems to see much more clearly than those living in Iran. But this uprising may take place, and then, Israel and America will walk into Iran, that will be taken over by new management, which will be normalized with Iran and be pro-America. This is the imaginary outcome that people are looking for. The thing is that it's widely believed. It's widely believed. And I think one of...
So, as Alistair said, this is the imaginary outcome. But he emphasizes, okay, it is widely believed with respect to the leadership. The second comment on this, okay, if the Americans are interested in decapitating the Houthis, you have to raise the question, Does the attack on Mossad headquarters by the Houthis, does that mean the Houthis have become interested in decapitating the Israeli leaders? Certainly important Israeli leaders are headquartered at the Mossad. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
One of the things that Colonel McGregor said on your program, which is so important and absolutely I concur with, that first of all, the Arab states are completely cowed and will not really push back at all. Syria isn't in a capacity, Lebanon is in a weak position. Certainly the Gulf states will not push back. Secondly, that it is viewed in the region that if US and Israel act in a combined way, they are invincible. I disagree with that, but I agree with Colonel McGregor that that's an underlying principle of American policy at the moment.
Right.
And the last one is that the world will just go along with it if they do decapitate Iran, take out its IRGC leadership, its religious leadership.
But you have to ask the question, what happens if the decapitation fails? What happens in the first instance if they weren't even able to decapitate the Houthis? What happens if the Houthis continue to fire missiles and drones, at the Israeli leadership? What happens if future air attacks by the Americans on the Houthis only result in an exhaustion of the available the naval forces of the United States, while the Houthis still stand strong? What happens to the Arab Gulf states then? What happens when they see weakness on the part of the Americans and the British? Are they still going to believe that the combination of Israel and the United States is invincible? And if that belief is shaken, do they still remain quiet? Or do they suddenly think it's their chance to take down Israel? Just some alternative questions.
What threat to American national security, what conceivable threat to American national security does Iran pose?
Costco shoppers say this gadget is actually worth it. This new $40 wireless light uses cutting-edge nano.
Of course it doesn't. It poses a presumed threat to Iran, to Israel. And it's suggested that Iran's ability or capacity, if they ever decided to move to a nuclear weapon, is threatening to Israel. And I mean, one of the things that is so striking in this period, and I'm sure, I mean, this has been the subject of many people on your show, is, that all of the team are absolutely in lockstep. What is the prime policy of the Trump administration? Protect Israel. Israel first. I mean, for me, it was extraordinary at the end when the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, said, what's his first priority? Israel. What is the FBI saying that for? That's his first priority, Israel. But all of them speak in lockstep, unconstrained support for Israel. And of course, Israel needs desperately an attack on Iran, not because they're threatened by Iran, not because they think that there is a nuclear weapon in Iran, but because the divisions in Israel have become so acute and so angry and persistent that they believe that the only thing to bring people together, as always in these conditions when the country is so deeply divided, have a war, raise the flag, bring everyone around together, find a way of coming together again by supporting a war, in this case, a war on Iran, together with the wars on Syria, the war on Yemen, and the war in Lebanon.
So that's another very important point by Alistair, which he did not make in the article, that these leaders of the United States and Israel are currently afraid of Israel falling apart. And they think they can stop this with a victory over Iran, an attack on Iran, a victory over Iran, a decisive victory over Iran. But where are the calculations about this when you consider the Iranians are currently backed by Russia and by China? And there's even a recently signed agreement where the Russians promised that in case of aggression by a third party against the other, that each of them would help the other to defend themselves. Consider how important the state of Iran is to China and to Russia as well. To China, because China gets 40% of its oil from Iran. To Russia, because Russia is engaged in developing a trade route, a north-south trade route that runs right through Iran. Right through Iran. By defending Iran, Russia would be protecting its economic future. That's a pretty strong incentive. And why would the Russians hesitate about fighting a proxy war against the United States? Especially since the United States is just getting through fighting a proxy war against Russia. Just points to think about.
Here's Mike Waltz, the president's national security advisor, making a thumbnail version of the explanation that you just gave, the talk shows. Chris, cut number 8.
We've seen the death and destruction that they're doing through its proxies between Hezbollah, the Assad regime, the Houthis, and what have you. If they had nuclear weapons, the entire Middle East would explode in an arms race. That is completely unacceptable to our national security. I won't get into what the back and forth has been, but Iran is in the worst place it has been from its own national security since 1979. Thanks to Hezbollah, Hamas, the Assad regime, and its own air defenses being taken out by the Israelis.
The FBI is warning about a new scam that's made over 200,000 victims in record time. If you own a credit card, please watch the...
Okay, so the question is...
Does this make sense?
Okay, so the question is, in relation to Israel, why does Iran need to have nuclear weapons? I suppose you could argue that they would serve as a deterrent to Israel, and that's why some people in Iran might think it's vitally important that they get them. Okay, but Iran may have the capability to destroy Israel within a single night just by throwing thousands of the ballistic missiles in its stock at Israel, overwhelming the Iron Dome and the other air defenses that Israel has. We've discussed this possibility a lot to destroy Israel. I don't think Iran needs atomic weapons. So why would they be in a rush to get them? I believe the American intelligence services here still are of the opinion that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. It has the ability to get one fairly quickly, but what stands in the way is a fatwa. There's a fatwa from the supreme leader, an earlier supreme leader, but still, that has served as a law that the Iranians obey, that these nuclear weapons are haram to them, that they are immoral and wicked and against the religion to use. We have to recognize the Iranians have had the capability to do nuclear weapons for decades, and they've never done them. Why would they do them now if they already have the capability to destroy Israel with their missiles and conventional weapons? I mean, why would they bother? As long as they have the capability to strike with their missiles before the American planes and the Israeli planes get there, why would they want to incentivize people to hit them first and quickly by acquiring these kinds of weapons?
I mean, you and Ritter and Colonel McGregor, as powerful the Iran military is and how sophisticated is A, their offensive weaponry, and B, their Russian-supplied defensive weaponry. And here you have the president's national security advisor saying they're weak and the time to strike is now. The only thing he didn't say was as a favor to Netanyahu.
It's driven by two things, I believe. The first one is there is an agreement that a decision, in fact, there is a delegation, your old friend Ron Dermer and the head of security in the atomic energy head from Israel are going to be in Washington this week arguing that there is no time to be lost. Why is there no time to be lost? If there is no time to be lost because in October, later this year, the snapback provisions of the JCPOA, the UN resolutions, could all come back into force if there is such a resolution is tabled by one of the participating, if you like, members of the JCPOA. There's a small provision for reconciliation, and then the resolution has to be tabled within 30 days. After that, it is mandatory on all UN nations to impose the sanctions on Iran, all the sanctions, all UN members. And that is the deal. That's why they're talking about spring. This is the deadline. It has to be spring because it's going to take that long to get through to the process and then have a snapback. Snapback is automatic in the process. It was put in this way so that Russia or China couldn't veto it. So that's one element of it. I think the other element of it, which is defining our politics at the moment, is that of Russia. Why do we see, if you like, this administration in such a rush to get a ceasefire and a deal with Russia. I mean, it really has been surprising to me. They didn't really even do a proper job of defining the ceasefire. I think it's going to be done much better by experts this week in Saudi Arabia. But they didn't do it. They're just rushing ahead saying, we must go, we must go. Is this just to put pressure on Putin? Or is it a form of, we're going back to sort of the Kissinger triangulation, that they want to deal with Russia so that when they instigate, pressure or attack Iran, because Iran, as you know, Trump has given Iran an ultimatum of 2 months to come to terms with this. And he said it's all going to happen very quickly. This is down to the final moments with Iran, he said. We can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Something is going to happen very soon. So I think, in a sense, what's going on between Russia and the United States on Ukraine, people have their eye looking over their shoulder at what's likely to happen with Iran. Either Israel acting on its own, which America doesn't want, or indeed with this team here. And we see that America has been preparing. They're doing exercising with B-52s in the region. They're flying them jointly with Israeli aircraft. They are preparing, and we know that and I wrote about it in my paper, how the Pentagon is preparing serious plans. Pentagons always have plans for everything, of course, but this looks like a much more serious plan to take it, including having nuclear weapons, still on the table.
So the man who said during his presidential campaign, his goal is to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, is financing slaughter in Gaza, is about to invade Iran. Neither Gaza nor Iran pose the remotest threat to the United States, and is in a hurry to bring about a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. I don't get it.
I think he thinks this is peace through strength.
It's
That
peace
the
through
whole
killing.
of the middle. It's a peace done by killing. It's sort of Jabotinsky plus the UNWAR. It's Jabotinsky plus. It's not possible. It's not possible to do this. Excuse me, someone's banging my window. Just 1 second, and I'll come back.
Sure.
That's why your nerves fail and your feet start burning. Did you know that neuropathy is a completely reversible condition? It may not seem like it.
Well, Alistair will be back with us in just a minute. What I'm scratching my head over this morning is how Donald Trump can be so impatient in his dealings with Vladimir Putin, but gives Bibi Netanyahu everything he wants and is willing to attack Iran. All taken care of, Alistair?
All taken care of. So sorry for that interruption.
Well, quite all right.
I'm alone in the house, and they would stop ringing the bell at me. Look, I think, what they're envisaging is, you ask me, I think actually that this is very much against the United States, not only just this sort of blind positioning of saying, we're all in lockstep on this. Israel is our main policy, and we are going to pursue this. They see this as the possibility, if you like, to decapitate and dismember Iran, and that then the whole thing, the whole region will be submissive to Israel. It will be under Israel's sort of tutelage.
That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Specifically, we're just getting through with an intervention or supporting an intervention inside of Ukraine, where the Ukrainians were built up over many years to make them capable of attacking Russia and supposedly winning a war against Russia. Why? So that the result could be the dismemberment, of Russia and the replacement of the current leaders of Russia with other leaders that would basically be vassals of the United States and vassals of NATO. Why do we get our people constantly thinking up schemes of this kind to dismember other nations?
I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, what is that about? When are they going to get off that kick? It is really ridiculous. And when it does work, when they do overthrow regimes, invariably it leads to hundreds of thousands of people who are dead. Even when our efforts are unsuccessful. We went into Iran. We wanted to pacify Iran. I'm sorry, not Iran, but Iraq. We wanted to dominate Iraq. We wanted a regime in Iraq that was going to be friendly to us. And Saddam, we had to get rid of him. Well, we did get rid of him. We killed hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million or 2 Iraqis in this process. And what is the end result? The end result is a state that's dominated by Shias hostile to the United States. So we very often get involved, in other nations. We try to put in regimes that are friendly to us. Sooner or later, they fall, and we get kicked out. Vietnam, right? Afghanistan, the situation in Iraq. And here we are, fighting a proxy war inside of Ukraine. The proxy war is lost. Everybody knows it. The Russians have won. Now we're looking for peace agreements. But we immediately want to start another war, in Iran. When will this stupidity stop?
And that's the solution, a peaceful solution, and then will follow normalization. They still think Syria will normalize with Israel. Iran then, after being decapitated, will normalize, and Israel will be secured. I mean, don't ask me if I think that is reasonable, because I just don't think it will happen. I think it will explode. I think the second thing, and I want to underline that, the second thing is it will be the end of Trump's effort at normalization with Russia, with Putin, because for sure the sentiment in Moscow, if there is an attack, as seems quite likely, on Iran in the next period, if there is such an attack, many people will say, listen, they had an agreement. They walked out of an agreement. Now they want to destroy Iran. Isn't there a message in this for us in Russia? It means we can't trust. The America is agreement incapable.
A very important point. The Russians have thought that we were agreement incapable during the Biden administration. Now Trump comes in, and supposedly he's looking for peace. Well, to get peace, what he needs to do is to show the Russians that we are agreement capable. But how is he going to do that? By attacking Iran? How is he going to do that? By trying to dismember Iran? It makes no sense.
And we saw over this week there was a very important statement by Putin about the future when he addressed the union of businessmen, very senior businessmen in Moscow this month. And he said, effectively, he said, look, this world, I mean, we're not going back. All of you businessmen have to realize sanctions will go on. He said, even, whatever happens in the negotiations, we're not going back to the world. You must live in the expectation that sanctions will continue. Look what's happened in the past. When we had sanctions put on us, and then they were lifted in the 80s, then they came back in another form. Restrictions and pressures on Russia will continue in the long term. And that is not a problem. It is an opportunity for us. We must orientate towards a more self-sufficient economy, have a small element of export led going to the BRICS, and we must concentrate on the payment and the financial systems in BRICS. And it was a very serious talk to them, and he said, don't think that this normalization with America is going to happen rapidly. It's not. We're in a new world. Sanctions are permanent. They will continue. We have to reorganize and reset our mentality to adjust to that. And that means that we've got to keep going. We must not be dependent on oil and gas. I mean, it's an adjunct to our economy, but what matters now is industrial production, the internal economy, to go have a sufficient. He's going back really to the 19th century economists, Sergei Vity, who was a prime minister in Russia, and Friedrich List, who both argued against the Anglo model of an open, globalized economy completely, and said you have to have an economy that is largely self-sufficient and self-sustaining, because if you go to a service consumer economy, you'll end up unable to give employment to your own workforce.
Let me take you back. Let me take you back.
Just a comment here. This retreat from having, an open economy also reminds me of the way the Soviet Union ran its economy. It definitely used a model, of autarky. It fixed the situation so that it was dependent only on itself and its satellites. Its economy had all kinds of problems, but it was a stable economic system for a very long time because it in no way depended on the West. Okay, so in part, I think Putin is retreating to that, but not exactly, because in helping to set up the BRICS and rely on the BRICS, he is rapidly getting a majority of the world's population to trade with. And the West, if they want to continue sanctioning and don't want to trade, will just become less and less important for the economy of Russia as time goes on. On the other hand, whether that occurs is up to us. Putin has been offering to do business with Trump. Whether Trump can accept the hand of peace or not, that's another question.
To Iran. Do not Russia and Iran have some sort of a defensive agreement or pact? Or stated differently, would Moscow just sit back and allow Tel Aviv and Washington to destroy the offensive weaponry in Iran and kill civilians?
This is precisely what I was saying to you with a sort of Kissinger a triangulation. Then it was, trying to take Russia away from China. And why they're hurrying to get an agreement on Ukraine is to sort of detach Russia from Iran. Now, and Trump has suggested that Russia would play a role in bringing about either a new agreement or stopping anything. Actually, there's nothing specific in that security arrangement with Iran about it's not a defensive pact, it is a trading pact. I looked at it, and it says that Iran has the right to peaceful nuclear energy, but it doesn't warn it against it or anything like that. People have been saying that, but I've looked at the paragraphs, it doesn't say that. And I don't think Russia would give up Iran under pressure from America, because Iran sits in the middle of the North-South corridor. This is Russia's main trade corridor for the future, the North-South corridor. And Iran sits in the middle of the East-West corridor, which is basically the Central Asian corridor for economic development. It's self-interest of Russia that it connects it to Iran, not some sort of willy-nilly thinking about, a sort of concert of states. It's self-interest that is important. Now, the point here is that in the memorandum that Trump signed at the time when Netanyahu visited Washington and Trump talked about the Gaza and, the new casino world of Gaza. At that time, he signed the memorandum. It had all the elements in it from the Pompeo-Bolton memorandum, i.e. that Iran is not to have allowed the capacity, not just to move or not move to weapons, but mustn't have the capacity to move to weapons. Secondly, it can't be allowed to have its defensive system. Its missiles must be removed. And thirdly, it's not allowed to continue with its foreign policy.
Okay, I certainly agree with Alistair about the East-West corridor and the North-West and the North-South corridor and the vital interests, that Russia has there. But the idea is, of the Americans, that the capability of Iran to defend itself against foreigners is to be removed. That's not something the Iranians are ever going to accept. They're going to fight to the death over that, to retain their capabilities to protect themselves. And the reason why they'll fight to the death over it is because you look at other nations that open themselves up to attack by the West. The primary case in point is Libya, which was doing research on nuclear weapons, and then came to agreement with the United States that it wasn't going to acquire nuclear weapons. A short time later, the United States simply bombed the state of Libya and ended that country as an effective state. And the bombings resulted in the killing of its leaders, open slave markets, total disaster for Libya, which it has not recovered from to this day. Is there any real thought that a nation of 85 million people with a devastating missile force is going to give up the advantages it now has without a fight to the death? I don't think so.
All that is not made explicit. It's always resolved. Oh, it can't have the nuclear weapon. But what Trump signed as the policy paper in that memorandum is that Iran should be completely disarmed and left naked.
I don't know why.
Defensive capacity.
I don't know why Iran would ever agree to that, but here's Mike Waltz yesterday saying just about the same thing. Cut number 9.
Full dismantlement. Iran has to give up its program in a way that the entire world can see. And this is, look, as President Trump has said, this is coming to a head. All options are on the table. And it is time for Iran to walk away completely from its desire to have a nuclear weapon. And they will not and cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapons program.
Is insane.
Yeah.
Why does Israel have a nuclear weapon without the permission of the UN? Why does Israel get away with slaughtering 50,000 innocents? Iran hasn't done anything like that. All of this is because of the domestic political pressure on Trump and the American government imposed by the donor class.
Yes, and I don't understand why they feel so tied on Israel to it. It's not in America's interest. As I say, it could blow up the agreement with Russia because, as it's not a question about Putin trusting Trump or anything like this. What we're talking about is something different. The political class in Russia is deeply skeptical about American ability to maintain its intentions. Deeply skeptical. And an attack on Iran, even if it's the financial attack, an ally of Russia, will be seen as an example of why America is not agreement capable. And that will tie Putin's hands, whatever he wants. Yes, Putin would like to see normalization, but it has to be, and he said that even last week, it has to be legally, it has to be foolproof. I'm not going to go in and repeat and be accused of repeating the same mistakes that took place during the Minsk agreement.
Got it.
And so it'll blow up the whole, I think, the whole program of the administration. Yet they seem absolutely, you've just heard it, they seem absolutely fixed for reasons I don't fully understand on moving ahead. And as I've tried to explain, Iran is, it's not about the nuclear issue. The subsidiary things that were inserted by Israel into that memorandum by Pompeo and Bolton, and which were then repeated by Trump directly. He signed off on the same requirements. The dismantlement of all Iranians' defensive systems and its foreign policy. It has to be rendered completely neutered.
I see.
So this, is madness. To have these aims is madness. Just as mad as the aims that the Biden administration had with respect to Russia. Where will this madness lead? By the way, is this madness really due to the donor class? I raise the question because from Trump's particular standpoint, this should be his last term. He's got to look at things and think, well, the probability of my running again is going to be very small. But if he were thinking this way and recognizing that it's very small, then why would he care about what the donor class thinks or wants? Why wouldn't he be making decisions not only in the interest of the American people, but in his own interest for staying alive? Why would he be acting in such a way as to raise the risk of nuclear war? Now, could it be that he's raising that risk to please the donor class because he has this mad idea that he's going to violate the Constitution and go for a third term in office, that he's really taking that seriously, that he really thinks he's going to need the Adelsons and the other big donors who have been supporting him so lavishly, because he's planning to run again. Is this foreign policy madness tied to his own madness of thinking that he can become the dictator for life? Again, I'm just raising that particular question.
Dark days coming, my dear friend, but thank you very much for this extraordinary analysis, Alistair. All the best to you. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
So maybe there are dark days coming, but there are people, good people, smart people, who disagree that Trump is going to go the whole way. But before we turn to one of those, let us now take a look at comments. Dee, let's begin with you. Do you have any comments to make on what I said or what Alistair had to say?
Like we said, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense no matter how you look at the situation. Like we said, Iran is peaceful. They're looking out for their own people, looking out to like their economy and everything else. We've, read a lot about that. And Iran doesn't want to get involved in wars. But it's this constant with Israel, wanting to push it. And you think there's well, we know what the intentions are with wanting the whole area, but it's just so ridiculous. And with Trump, he wants to be friends with Russia, wants peace with Russia, wants peace, but on the other hand, it makes no sense to be starting all this with Iran. And as also was brought up, everybody else that has nuclear weapons. Iran has no intention of attacking anyone unless they're the ones that, are being put in a position, when they're being attacked, like Israel attacking them. Then they will reciprocate. But they have no intention of going attacking everybody in the world. The whole thing is just so ridiculous.
I think it's ridiculous also, and I agree with you. They have no intention of attacking anybody as far as we can see now. I mean, all they're doing in terms of attacking people, they have the issue with Israel. It's a religious issue, as well as a political issue. In part, it remains a very serious issue because Israel has been looking to weaken Iran for half a century now.
Yeah.
And Iran is responding in part, to that, at least since the Ayatollahs took over. Before then, of course, the Israelis were allied with the Shah. So, Joe Logan says, if I was a strong country, I would not want to fuck with Russia and America combined. But Iran is worse. Not sure what you mean there, because Russia is allied with Iran. So it's going to be a combination of Iran and Russia versus America and Israel. Steve Wolfman says, hi, Sherry. Joe Logan says, I've been in Iran and met people. And he says, you ain't decapitating Iran, forget that. Yeah, I think we ought to forget about that too. Joe Logan says Israel should die. Well, certainly the nation of Israel has been risking its life now for some time. And if it doesn't change its course, it's going to be very difficult for it to continue to live. Sherry says, hi, Steve and Earl. And Steve shared this to Facebook. Joe Logan says Israel should be destroyed. And it says America and Russia have always talked shit, but at the same time, they've always been allies. I don't think that was true during the Cold War. I don't think they've been allied then. Steve Wolfbrand says, nice to see everybody. By the way, at the end of the First World War, and for the 20 years thereafter, until the beginning of the Second World War, the Americans and Russians were not allied, and the Americans joined the invasion of Russia during the time of troubles after the First World War. We actually had a force in the Pacific area, of Russia, where we joined other nations to, I guess, what everybody was looking to do was to dismember Russia. Earl says, nice to see you too, Steve. Joe Logan says, Israel didn't fuck with Iran's Air Force. He says America's Air Force is working for Israel. Yes. Evelyn says, I'm more concerned about Palestine. Too many wildcards to predict what the U.S. will do regarding Iran. Things are complicated in the Balkans, in Turkey. The EU has gone bonkers too. Yes. Evelyn says, I want a solution for Palestine. Surely any moves there have to be next in line. Joe Logan says, the world is fucked up, sis. Steve Wolfman says, Anthony Bourdain said the Iranian people were the nicest that he ever met. I've always thought of Iranians as very nice people. In fact, there are some Iranians in this building I just discovered. They're living on the floor right over the neighbors who are right in the apartment, right next to ours. Joe Logan says, ain't nobody with a half brain going to launch, nuclear weapons. Well, that's what's up for debate, Joe. Whether the people running things in Washington right now have half a brain. Even when it says Joe Logan, it can be as fucked up as it wants, but Palestine is a point of contention domestically in almost every country in the West. Joe Logan says, I'm pro-Palestine, but how can we stop the Holocaust? We have no power individually. Evelina says we can apply pressure collectively. Joe Logan says, what? Normalized? There is no normal. They're crazier than a shithouse raton meth. Not sure what that is. Evelina says, including other states. Evelina says, Israel is already running into problems in Syria, which it is set on controlling. Like Dr. Joe said, it has issues at home also. Very, very serious issues, which are getting more and more serious. There's been talk of a military coup in recent days also. Finally putting Netanyahu to bed, as it were. Well, our next piece is a fairly short clip. It's from an interview of Ray McGovern with Judge Napolitano.
Bold and say, okay, for my promotion purposes or my bonus, I'll say that Iran.
Sorry, folks. Something like here is the right place.
Able to make that not happen.
How can the same mentality that says he wants the Nobel Peace Prize, that says he wants a grand reset with Russia and probably China, Brazil, and India as well, that is very impatient to end the war in Ukraine, possibly be considering, I speak of the president, of course, possibly be considering bombing Iran. Does he really think the Kremlin would just sit back and watch and do nothing?
Well, I hope now that Fiona Hill has been deprived of her security clearances, as have all my grandchildren. I hope that people who don't know anything about this kind of stuff will not be in the mix this time. So he's blustering. Okay, I mean, if we're not used to Trump's bluster until he faces reality, we haven't learned anything from the way he operates. So that's my take on this. Trump is pretty much in charge, and what Mike Waltz may say, what Kellogg might say, or what others subordinate to Trump might say, Rubio, for example, doesn't matter. Doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Okay, it's what Trump says. What Trump has said through his spokesman is that there's a renewed trust between him and President Trump. That's big. What he says is through his spokesman Peskov.
You meant to say renewed trust between he and Putin, of course.
Is that they're both very, very interested. They're determined to create a new relationship between the two countries. In my view, and of course, I'm a Russian expert, so I have a different view from others. That is what's going to govern this thing. And after the bluster is over, and after, hopefully, Tulsi Gabbard sticks to her guns and said, do an honest estimate on where Iran is in developing a nuclear weapon, unless they all fold, Trump. If they all fold, Judge, then we'll have a war. But I don't think they will. I think this is mostly bluster.
Have you seen this? It's absolutely insane. Look at the presentation on what's inside this can. And
of course, Trump is not known for not blustering. Whoa, there you go.
Yeah, here's the dangerous part. Including Tulsi Gabbard, Trump is surrounded by arch Zionists to a person. Vance, Hegseth, Rubio, Waltz, that character, Sebastian Gorka, and even, regrettably, Tulsi Gabbard. Might they be motivated by this desire to please the extreme elements in Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling coalition, as opposed to doing the right thing in their advising Trump?
Well, this is big, Judge. This is war. This is a war that we could not possibly win. And, unless the Pentagon has really gone out to lunch, they and Tulsi, if she has the guts that I thought she had in the beginning, they'll stick to their guns and advise Trump, well, you've scared them to death, but they're not going to relent. And besides, Mr. Trump, Bush and Cheney faced this exact same situation. And we told them that Iran was not working on a nuclear weapon, and that's still the case. So, Mr. Trump, you can make the war if you want, but you're going to lose, and you'll be doing it on the same false pretenses that Bush and Cheney did on Iraq.
So that's it. Ray is convinced that Trump will bluster and make a lot of false moves, but in the end, he isn't going to be serious about this because he will get advice from the Pentagon and from Tulsi that we cannot win the war against Iran. Now, there are going to be military calculations on the other side. There are going to be advocates who are going to say, we can hit them with Trident submarines equipped with nuclear weapons having a low yield. We can devastate their capability to retaliate. there are going to be those counter arguments. Trump is going to hear those too. Then he's probably going to hear some other people saying, well, it's not a question of their retaliation because they will get prior warning, okay, of our movements. And before those nuclear submarines can hit them, they will launch a devastating attack on our ships and on Israel. And then we will be destroyed before they can get to us. And then it will be back and forth in military discussions and back and forth and back and forth. Trump then will be in a position of having to evaluate whether what he's contemplating is a high-risk sort of game that had the potential for getting out of control so that he himself could lose his life if it escalated enough. And I hope that is enough to bring him around. So let's see if we have any more comments about this. Evelina says Israel will be confronted with too many obstacles simultaneously to have real success in any one enterprise. Evelina says it will have to let go of Palestine. I believe it will have to let go soon. This will be helped greatly if Netanyahu is couped and replaced. Then that would be, I think, a very good outcome for the possibility, for the kind of possibility that you are talking about, Evelina. Okay, so let us move on to our next piece, which is another interview. It's a series of clips. These are from an interview that the judge had today, or maybe it was yesterday, I forget. I think it was yesterday.
For the qualifying purchase, call 800-511-4620.
That's, of course, Scott Ritter, okay, and the judge. The judge's commercial is over in a couple of seconds.
800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeSnap.com and tell them the judge sent you.
Zateo is here to provide the kind of honest reporting and blunt political analysis that you won't get from corporate.
Scott Ritter, a pleasure, my dear friend. I know we've talked about Yemen in the past, but the president said just a few minutes ago that the bombing in Yemen was very successful. Can you fathom what he meant by that?
Well, first of all, I don't have their target list. I don't have access to the battle damage assessment, so I'm not in a position to provide independent corroboration of what the president claims or to be able to directly contradict him. What I can say is this: knowing what I know about how this thing works, I would give it about a 98% probability that the president's words do not reflect reality, that the situation on the ground in Yemen is far different than the situation that he has been briefed upon. There's no doubt in my mind that the United States Central Command has identified points on the ground and that the U.S. Navy has put bombs on those points, and photographs show that those geographic points have achieved a certain level of battle damage. But I don't share any confidence that those points on the ground have anything to do with deterring or destroying the Houthis' ability to continue to carry out military operations designed to interdict shipping in the Red Sea or to strike targets in Israel, which should be the military mission of the United States, one would think.
It's funny you should say all that, Scott, because in an hour, will be interviewing our friend Pepe Escobar live from Yemen, and he has already sent us a video, which we will share, of course. And what does the video show? Destruction of residential neighborhoods. Doesn't show destruction of anything of any military value whatsoever. Why would CENTCOM destroy residential neighborhoods? Why would they target residential neighborhoods?
Okay, just to go back a bit, I'm sure you all noticed Scott's very flat statement that it appears the president has no understanding of what was done in terms of the attack, and no real understanding of what he's fighting in terms of, of going after Yemen. But we'll get more comments of that kind from Scott as we go forward.
Neighborhoods.
Well, again, I can only first of all, the targeting of the residential neighborhoods is beyond me, unless the president, President Trump, is notorious for creating liberal rules of engagement, basically untying the hands of the military so that issues of military necessity outweigh issues of collateral damage or issues of whether or not, basically, are you getting the bang for your buck? I mean, everybody knows in wartime, civilians pay a very heavy price. But generally speaking, the military is supposed to review targets to determine that if there are collateral casualties, that those casualties are commensurate with the military value of the target being struck. In the past, I have to tell you that the United States, at least when I was in, we would not knowingly strike a target that we knew were going to result in significant civilian casualties. We would deliberately avoid that target. Where accidents have been made, mistakes have been made, and of course, civilians have died in large numbers. We struck a bomb shelter during in Adamiyah in Baghdad during the Gulf War, killing hundreds of Iraqi civilians. But again, that was a mistake, an accident. Here, they're striking targets. Knowing what I know about Middle East procurement, and a lot of the targets that are being struck, I believe, are related to the Houthis' ability to procure materials from abroad. So you'll have import companies that will operate under various fronts for Yemeni intelligence. And we get a smattering of data here and there, and then we build target sets. I can tell you in Baghdad, as a weapons inspector, I inspected a number of facilities that were located in the middle of residential areas. Many of them were former homes that had been converted to export-import groups that were responsible for buying military equipment from abroad. It's the paperwork. It's where the offices are. The equipment's not there. What I'm thinking is that, first of all, I don't think the United States has a tremendous amount of hard targeting. The Yemeni have been doing this for a long time, since the Houthi have been doing this since 2014. They've been working together with the Iranians. The Iranians are experts at going underground. I can guarantee you whatever target deck we had about the Houthi or Yemeni armed forces and bases and such is no longer valid. It's been shuffled several times as the Houthis seek to relocate their relocatable targets. So I would imagine that our intelligence is out of date. I would imagine that as we bomb targets, we're desperately looking for new targets. So we pull up old intelligence that points us to places on the ground. A lot of times I went to inspect a facility that we thought was a export-import control, only to find that it had been shut down a year prior or 6 months prior and moved to a different location. Our intelligence doesn't update the target list, and as we expend targets, and we've been bombing for a long time, we run out of targets, I can tell you that. And so we go and we scrape the bottom of the barrel. So we're bombing targets that we have no confirmation. I can also guarantee you that our intelligence on the ground in Yemen is uniformly poor. The Houthi are a very insular group. We do not have the kind of penetration into the Houthi society, into their leadership, into their industry necessary to produce the kind of targeting that would be conducive to real-time targeting of value. So I believe our target decks are crap, excuse my language, and that we're blowing up targets that don't exist, they're incorrect. We know this because we're killing a whole bunch of civilians. We're blowing up a whole bunch of targets that have nothing to do whatsoever with interdicting the Houthis' ability to fire missiles. And these are what we call, relocatable targets, mobile relocatable targets. Historically, we have tremendous problems striking these. During the Gulf War, that was my war, was to try and hunt down and kill Iraqi Scud missiles. And I can tell you, despite diverting thousands of sorties and putting men on the ground and all this, we didn't kill a single one. And that's what's happening today. We're not killing anything except innocent civilians.
Well, somebody who agrees with you, and the president was very frustrated at this a few minutes ago, I don't know this person, is the editor of Atlantic Magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg says...
Okay, before we get into some of the Jeffrey Goldberg deal, just from those series of statements by Scott, those call into question what Michael Waltz was saying about decapitating the Houthis, that striking the Houthi leadership, successfully targeting its leadership. Can Waltz be believed that the attack we already made on the Houthis was successful in targeting the Houthi leadership? I don't think so. If you look at what the Israelis did, in the targeting of Hezbollah leadership, well, the Israelis had a lot of intelligence about what was going on inside of Lebanon. I mean, they had been penetrating Lebanon with people, with agents for years and years. They knew where the leadership of Hezbollah was sitting. They got inside information about the meeting the leaders were having, so they could organize this devastating attack with the bunker buster bombs to go down way under 14 floors to get them. They could do that there. But with Yemen being, such an insular country, we don't have the same intelligence with respect to Lebanon. It is unlikely that we know where the leaders are, for the reason Scott stated. It is not likely that we were successful in decapitating any of them. And as we shall see, one person we failed to decapitate was the public face of the Houthis, specifically the guy known as Yahya Sareh or Saria.
Officials in the Trump administration, you ready for this, Scott? Accidentally added him to a group text.
Oh yeah, I meant to move this along past this point. It's not really essential for our purposes here. Okay, there we are.
Do you know the U.S. solar company's nasty little secret? It turns out if you live in Virginia, they have to give you solar.
It's a nuclear weapons program that is doing everything it can to involve the United States in a war in Iran. What happens if the IDF and the United States attack Iran? What will Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin do?
Well, first of all, let me just start off by saying that Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and is obligated by law and by its own commitments not to have a nuclear weapons program. And as we speak, Iran hasn't been shown to have a nuclear weapons program. In fact, the International Atomic Energy Agency even though it decries Iranian non-compliance, it's non-compliance with an inspection regime that was, attached to the Iran nuclear deal, which is no longer in place. So when the IAEA says Iran is in non-compliance, it doesn't mean that Iran is actively pursuing a nuclear weapon, but Iran has developed certain capabilities which, according to Iranian officials' own statements, could be brought together in a very short period of time to make Iran a nuclear capable state. And this is what Donald Trump and, of course, Israel are worried about. I will say that in my personal experience in negotiating with people from this region, that the Trump administration is taking the absolute worst approach. The Iranians will not back down. They will not concede to threats. I do believe that there's a window of opportunity there to get Iran to agree to reduce its uranium enrichment program, which would alleviate much of the concerns that Israel and the United States has. But we're taking the wrong approach. And so this will lead to confrontation if we don't change course. What will Russia do? Russia has a strategic framework, a security framework with Iran, but it's not a treaty. There's no Article 5 NATO-like protection where Russia will extend it to. But the United States is, as we speak, having parallel negotiations with the Russians, where we're trying to tell the Russians that we can be trusted, that we're worthy partners in peace and such, and then we turn around and are pushing for a war with Iran, where we have violated every agreement, where we have no legal framework to do this, no justification whatsoever to do this. And as you pointed out, the hypocrisy of seeking to hold Iran accountable for a theoretical nuclear program on behalf of Israel, which refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and has a nuclear weapons program that refuses to allow this program to be A, admitted, and B, brought under inspections. The hypocrisy is unreal. If we attack Iran, I think the foundation of trust between the United States and Russia will be shattered. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to.
Scott agrees with Alistair Crook very strongly, on this question. If Trump wants peace, if he wants to make peace with Russia, he's going to have to refrain from attacking Iran. He might be able to do a few more attacks on the Houthis, but he won't be able to move on any further, to Iran. And based on what has happened so far, Trump is unlikely to have serious success when it comes to undermining the capability of the Houthis. And again, I don't know any of the details yet, but there was an attack on the Houthis by the Houthis today, on Mossad headquarters. That's pretty serious.
To move forward, but Russia I don't think could ever trust the Trump administration, nor could anybody in the world. We want to have good relations with China. We'll destroy that. We will become literally that which Donald Trump said he didn't want us to become, a warmongering nation going out in search of enemies, getting ourselves bogged down in yet another Middle East conflict that kills hundreds of thousands, costs trillions. And this one could dangerously go nuclear. The potential for escalation to the use of nuclear weapons is real because, as Donald Trump himself knows, and as Mike Waltz knows, when Trump was president last time, they did consider striking Iran. And one of the problems they faced was that our conventional weapons cannot penetrate Iran's underground nuclear facilities. So in order to take out Iran's underground nuclear facilities, we would need deep penetration, low-yield nuclear weapons, which Donald Trump ordered to be built and deployed. And today, these weapons are deployed and I believe are part of any targeting package that we're preparing to use against Iran, which would mean that striking Iran isn't just ripping up treaties. It means that the United States will break the taboo that's been in place since Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the use of nuclear weapons, and we will become, by definition, the worst nation in the world, the most evil nation in the world, the nation that, A, can not only not be trusted by anybody, but should be viewed as an enemy by everybody. And that's not a good place to be.
So, you heard that. It was loud and clear. The end result of what Trump is contemplating is exactly the result that he does not want, even if he were to become successful militarily. The result would be an isolated country, a country condemned worldwide by everyone, a kind of hermit country. This is not the future we want for our country. I don't think it's the future Trump wants himself. He wants a country that will be able to do business freely around the world. And he wants a cut of that business personally. And as long as he's president, he'll see to it that he gets that kind of cut. Be damned the Constitution of the United States. But he can't accomplish that if the country is isolated because it has done something completely unacceptable to the rest of the international community.
Does Mike Waltz know what he's talking about when he says Iran is in the worst place it's been in from its own national security since 1979? He seems to think that Iran would roll over if the Israelis and the Americans attacked.
Mike Waltz is repeating Israeli intelligence. This isn't an Israeli-based assessment that reflects what happened in Syria. We still don't know exactly how the Assad regime fell. We do know that the CIA, working with Israeli intelligence and a variety of other intelligence agencies, have been working to bring down the Assad regime. We also know that the CIA, with Israeli intelligence, British intelligence, others, have been working for decades to bring down the regime in Tehran. We know that in 2023, the summer of 2023, they actually executed a regime change plan, bringing a number of various groups to rise up against the regime after the death of the Kurdish girl in police custody. I spoke with former President Raisi in September of 2023, and he said that that uprising was the greatest threat to Iranian security since the revolution, since 1979. But here's the important thing. They beat it. They gathered together, they rallied, and they defeated it. So, I think Mike Waltz is buying into an assessment that's derived more from what he desires the situation to be than what the reality is. I mean, maybe they know what they're talking about. Maybe the regime is nothing but a house of cards, and if you huff and you puff and you blow, it will come tumbling down like Assad did. Nobody predicted Assad doing that. So you can't say that that Waltz and others are totally off base, because we have a precedent that just took place in December. But what I would say is that it's very dangerous to predicate your aggressive stance on Iran on the notion that this regime will collapse, because the history shows that it didn't collapse, and they have a lot of weapons. This isn't Syria, weakened nation, weakened military, etc. This is Iran with significant military power capable, as they've proven, of striking and destroying any American military base in the region. I just have to bring up the Al-Assad air base that got hit with a dozen precision-guided missiles that hit exactly what they wanted, and had the Iranians not warned us about this attack, would have killed hundreds of Americans. And Israel knows that their air defense shield doesn't work. The other thing is Mike Waltz is perpetrating yet another Israeli hype, which is that Israel somehow destroyed Iran's air defense systems in their brief little limited strike in the aftermath of True Promise 2. No evidence has been put on the table to back this up. The Iranians don't act as if that took place. The Israelis have provided no photographs or anything to back this up, nor has the United States. It's simply this hype put out there. I think a lot of what Israel and the United States are seeking to do is play a psychological warfare right now to make the Iranian regime unsure of itself and maybe therefore more conducive to engage in negotiations. And the last thing I'll say is this: Iran will never sit down with the United States, led by Donald Trump, that's behaving in this fashion. Iran will not respond to this. What Iran will do is talk to the Russians and the Chinese. And if Trump had a brain on his head, he would know that the Russians have actually set Iran up to achieve exactly the outcome that Donald Trump wants, but he's not going to give them a chance by this blustering attitude. The Houthi have withstood the American attacks, and Iran will withstand the American attacks. The difference is the Houthi can't strike back the way Iran can. Israel will pay an extraordinarily heavy price. So will the American military. And sadly, so will the Iranian people, especially if we use nuclear weapons.
Well, the American people are not.
Okay, so there again, very definite statements from Scott. We need to keep in mind, though, what Ray McGovern, a very good friend of Scott, has said. Ray thinks, in the end, after all the bluster is done, that Trump is going to go for peace because he wants normalization with Russia. He wants to reduce the risk of nuclear war. A serious attack on Iran increases the risk of nuclear war. I think Trump knows that. I think he also knows that a full-scale war in West Asia would bring the Russians in, at least with heavy assistance, and they would come in on the side of Iran. And that would destroy the possibility of normalization and peace between the United States and Russia. So, we still have another clip from Scott. I need to refresh my memory about where that comes from. We need to move to about 24 minutes and 10 seconds in. Okay.
If you're unsure or unaware of your eyeglass prescription, or if your prescription changes frequently due to
brown people.
If you're unsure or unaware of your eyeglass prescription, or if your prescription changes frequently due.
Are we preparing for war with Iran?
Oh, yes, we've been preparing for a long time now. Central Command has plans. Judge, we've been preparing forever. When I was in the Marines back in 1985, the summer of '85, I got a commendation because I rewrote the combat intelligence plan for the war plan to go into Iran. The war plan that we executed during Desert Storm was a modification of the war plan that would be used to flow in military equipment if we were, for instance, instead of landing in Saudi ports, if we were going to land in Bandar Abbas or Chabahar after forcefully taking them. We've been planning this and updating this war plan forever. It's one of the oldest war plans we have on the books. It's right up there with Korea. And, so, yeah, I think the problem is we don't have the resources to execute. I can guarantee you we don't have the resources today to execute the war plan that I was working on back in the 1980s, because that required hundreds of thousands of American forces to be flowed into the region, thousands of aircraft, ships that we don't have anymore. And that's one of the problems, is that we're preparing for something that we can't execute properly. And Trump, again, was briefed on this back when he was first president. He was threatening to bomb targets in Iran. He was told by his Secretary of Defense at that time, Mattis, that if he bombs them and it becomes a regional war, the United States, in order to prevail, would have to deploy, 400 to 700,000 troops into the region that we don't have. It would take months, if not years, to mobilize those troops, and then we'd have to bring them into the region. And again, I want to remind people that we went to Desert Storm, or even when we invaded Iraq in 2003, our troops offloaded on the ports that weren't under fire. We landed at airports that weren't under fire. Trying to move hundreds of thousands of American forces into the Persian Gulf region today, every airfield we would land in would be destroyed or under attack. Every port facility we tried to offload on would be under missile attack. Our ships would be attacked as they closed in. A completely different scenario. So, yeah, I think we're preparing for war, but I also have to say we're not prepared for the war that we're preparing for.
Scott Ritter, thank you, my friend. Thank you for an extraordinary analysis from historical, military, and moral perspective as only you can give us. All the best. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Of course.
So, very explicit statements from Scott, very much to the point. A lot of valuable statements on the capability we have, comparing that to the statements that are being made by the war-like people on Trump's particular staff. So, I thought you should hear all that.
Yeah, that was very good. It was very good to listen to it.
It was good to listen to it, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And listen to different voices, to get perspective.
Yeah, listening to different voices, but they're all either colleagues of each other, okay, or in the case of Scott and Ray, they're very close friends.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and yet they sort of have a different opinion about where this might actually end up. I think Scott is in the mode of warning people to stay out of Iran and not to do anything foolish. And Ray was in the mode, of telling people, well, in spite of his blustering, it's likely that in the end, Trump, is going to back off. Because what he'll probably hear from the Pentagon, not necessarily from Hegseth himself, but from the military people in the Pentagon and from Tulsi Gabbard, he is likely to hear, this is not a war that we can win. And it's not a war that we can come out of undamaged. It's a war that could be financially devastating for us, economically devastating for us. In the unlikely event that we did win, the cost would still be very, very heavy for us. I think all that is correct. Evelina says it will have to let go of Palestine. This is speaking of Israel. And she points out Netanyahu is not in good health either. And she says sometimes there are biological constraints that cannot be ignored forever. And I believe Netanyahu treasures his life. Earl of Laurel says, I've got Scott Ritter saturation syndrome. I could swear I've seen him as a guest on 2 different shows at the same time. Yeah, well, of course, the shows are broadcast, at different times. But he has an extremely heavy schedule, of interviews. And then he has his own lengthy shows on Tuesday and Friday also. And in addition to those shows, he does some special shows as well. I mean, the schedule that he keeps is absolutely devastating. But he is one who speaks very clearly and who explains why he thinks as he does. He doesn't just assert things, he gives reasons, and he's very well informed about military facts involved. Sherry says, I don't, for the life of me, understand why any head of state would ever believe the thing we say. Our track record of lying goes back hundreds of years. I'm afraid so. And even says, if only his, I'm not sure what she intended to say there. But have you any more comments on that, Dee?
No, I was just going to say, Sherry's so right. It's with everything. The U.S. is always breaking promises, or they'll have an agreement, they'll sign documents, and the next thing you know, that's that.
Right. So I think, as Ray McGovern says, you have to agree, and then you have to verify. It's no longer trust and verify as it was in the 1980s. It's now agree, but verify continuously so that your party, is held accountable always, so you don't have to trust them. And that's the kind of agreement that Putin is going to negotiate. He's going to construct the agreement in such a way that if we fail to uphold our end, then we can be held accountable. That it will be in the power of Russia to hold us accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And that will not depend on anyone else except for Russia, except for Putin. That's the kind of agreement that Putin is going to negotiate. Okay, let us get to our last very informative piece. This is another one of the judge's interviews. He just had a wonderful day on Monday. He really did. I mean, his pieces were fantastic.
War, of course. Today, this afternoon, late afternoon, we went to the safe in the city.
Let me make sure I have the timing right. This is Pepe Escobar, and he is in Yemen for a conference. He is actually there, and we're just going to go through the whole thing, okay, and we'll comment on it, because it's very, very, very informative. Let me go back to where it starts. About here.
Bar, my dear friend, where are you?
Judge, wow, I am in Sana'a, capital of Yemen. And I even got a little bit of Sana'a for you here. This is part of the old city.
And what are you doing there, my friend?
Well, it's an outstanding story. In fact, personally, it's been 1 year that I've been trying to set up my own trip to Yemen. And we are a small group, in fact, part of a conference on Palestine, which started on Saturday morning. It's going to end tomorrow, Tuesday. Today, we had discussions with scholars, Yemeni scholars, who are drawing a sort of roadmap of what could happen next in terms of the whole Palestine tragedy and how can Yemen help. And of course, in the middle of all that is, for a pilgrim like me, I always dreamed of coming to Yemen. And obviously, this morning I went out walking by myself in the streets of Sana'a, and then I was politely arrested by the security because I could not do this by myself, right? And they freaked out completely. But the feeling of everyday life in the city, and this city has outstanding aspects that you think you are in the pre-Middle Ages or the late 19th century, early 20th century. But there is a feeling of normalcy. And now this is a country at war, of course. Today, this afternoon, late afternoon, we went to the site that was bombed by the Americans yesterday night. We didn't hear the bombing, but we listened to the sirens. And immediately afterwards, we knew that somewhere was hit. And it was like 2.5 kilometers from the hotel where we were staying, which is very close to the old city, which is the most.
We're going to play the video. We've taken the sound off because we can't hear your voice over all the.
Of course, yes. We did this in a rush.
You can describe to us what we're seeing, Chris. If you'd play that video.
Okay, thank you.
The magnesium in your cabinet is not only filled with heavy metals, but it also can be making your age faster, and I'm about to prove it.
So where are you?
I am at the site of a residential building. There were only civilians inside. There was hit by American bombs yesterday night around 9 o'clock. And today, of course, we lobbied the security services to take us there, and we explained to them that the world needs to see these images. And if it's not for us, the small group of independents who are here, this will never be on American mainstream media or Western mainstream media. And I talked to the owner of this building. It was a 2-story building. It was, they were trying to refurbish it somewhat. There were only civilians inside. So far, the numbers that we have, 4 to 5 people died and around 11, 12 were injured, and in the street outside. So there's no military value whatsoever. And you can see by yourselves, these are some of the hills behind Sana'a. This is a residential area. It's, I would say, a lower middle class proletariat residential area.
What does the United States gain by bombing a residential area of the capital of Yemen?
Absolutely. No, it's even worse because it points to a dysfunctionality and a level of absurdity that is absolutely extraordinary, and compounded with the so-called leak that we had a few hours ago. Everybody here in Sana'a, diplomats, the security services, the guys who are guarding our perimeter, everybody read it.
Well, the leak he's talking about is the text chain that occurred in the United States that involved the major decision makers about the attacks on Yemen and the plans for the Iranian attack, and supposedly inadvertently, but there was an editor from The Atlantic who was included in this text chain. And so he got to see what everybody had to say. And he reported on it. And that was the leak that they're talking about here, that Pepe is talking about here.
The narrative is that a leaked group chat showing how the Yemen war was planned. And we have quotes like Vice President Vance saying, let's make sure our message is tight, or the strongest reason to do this is to send a message, quote. So this is completely absurd. Can you imagine that these people were discussing launching a war on Signal, which is an encrypted...
Listen to what my former Fox colleague, who is now the Secretary of Defense, said, quote, exactly. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, close quote. So we must advance the idea that, quote, Biden failed and Iran funded. Do you believe that? They're bombing people that the Secretary of Defense says nobody knows who the hell they are, and they're going to blame it on Joe Biden and on Iran.
Judge, obviously, he doesn't know who the Houthis are, or Ansar Allah is, or what Yemen is, or anything about the history of Yemen, which is a people of warriors. Today, for instance, we were visiting the house of Imam Yahya, which is a 3,000-year-old, then rebuilt, of course. It's called the Stone House. And, of course, he's the heir of 3,000 years of history. And we were visiting that. This is an extremely sophisticated people who fought invaders, who fought until recently the Saudi, backed by America, UAE coalition, which was bombing parts of Yemen all the time, including the capital, Sana'a. 2 days ago, we saw one of the bombings in 2017 where they bombed a civilian gathering and killed over 1,000 civilians and over 2,000 injured. And we see the tap 1, tap 2, with our own eyes. It's completely absurd. And there's something that when you analyze the so-called leaked signal communication, by the way, signal is encrypted. So this was not leaked at all. This was somebody inside the group that decided to reveal, which makes it even more absurd.
Well, somebody inside the group, the Wall Street Journal intimates it was either Mike Waltz or Pete Hegseth, but somebody inside the group says that this reporter for The Atlantic was inadvertently or accidentally invited to join the group. He didn't even realize what was going on until he determined who he was listening to.
Judge, this is bullshit. This is total bullshit. He was part of the conversation, obviously, and maybe they did it. There was an express idea of let's leak this to a guy who is not part of our gang. As you know, the Atlantic is not part of Trump 2.0, and this editor is an absolute idiot. It was perfect in this. But coming back conceptually to what happened, this group didn't think that the Houthis were a real threat. And it's not a matter of the Houthis being a threat. The Houthis are extremely capable militarily. If Hegseth doesn't know this, I'm sorry, but he's a joke. They didn't think that the Americans would understand these strikes. And in fact, nobody in the US understands why the Pentagon is striking against civilian targets in Yemen. And they did it anyway to send a message. And I'm quoting one of them. In fact, it's Vance. The strongest reason to do, quote, it's to send a message. So you go on Signal and you start a war to send a message. What is this?
And you kill...
If you're unsure or unaware of your eyeglass prescription.
And you kill more than 1,000 people, and then an extra 4 or 5 in order to send a message. Come on. This is totally corrupt without respecting any human values.
Prescription. Or if your prescription changes frequently.
Hi, everyone.
I screwed that up, of course. I'll try to get back to where I was.
This group didn't think that the Houthis were a real threat. And it's not a matter of the Houthis being a threat. The Houthis are extremely capable militarily. If Hegseth doesn't know this, I'm sorry, but he's a joke. They didn't think that the Americans would understand these strikes. And in fact, nobody in the US understands why the Pentagon is striking against civilian targets in Yemen. And they did it anyway to send a message. And I'm quoting one of them. In fact, it's Vance. the strongest reason to.
Okay.
And he was explaining in detail the spiritual, religious, and moral necessity for Ansar Allah, the Houthis.
I missed something. I'll go back.
It's the attitude of the Houthis about Americans.
We were having, in fact, it's still going on, Judge, in a room like, not far from where I'm talking to you now, with a former prime minister who's now, he's even more powerful than the prime minister. He's the head of their political council. And he was explaining in detail the spiritual, religious, and moral necessity for Ansar Allah, the Houthis, and this government, the government of Sana'a, to help the Palestinian plight and to help their brothers. They define the Palestinians as brothers. And that explains, of course, the attacks on Israeli ships or ships delivering whatever that is to Israel, or ships who are helping Israel one way or another. And they say, look, and now that we restarted because the ceasefire was broken by Israel, if they stop with the ethnic cleansing project and the starvation of Palestine, we also stop it. The day before, very, very important. Yesterday, I was talking to another guy very, very high up in the political council here. I asked him point blank, do you have privileged channels of communication with China and Russia? He gave me a response that was fascinating because it was lost in translation, of course, but the bits and pieces that I could pick up, he was saying basically in metaphors that, of course we do, but we'll never advertise this to anybody. And the Russians and the Chinese know exactly what the US and Israel are up to in Palestine and against the axis of resistance. And of course, there are very close relations between Russia and China with certain vectors of the axis of resistance. And they understand that this is a much bigger war. They understand the full forever wars ethos when you think about US-Israel against the axis of resistance. And the people here in Yemen, they are very sophisticated. I was very, very impressed. Everybody that we talked to. And
Do they have
yes.
an understanding of why the Trump administration is trying to kill them?
No, because they cannot explain it. And because there is no rational explanation. And this so-called leak today only confirms to them that the whole thing is absolutely irrational. To send them, just like that, to send a message. They're not a threat. But anyway, let's do it because we can. A typical imperial attitude, right? But you are messing with a nation of warriors. This is very, very serious. Yesterday, something absolutely extraordinary happened. We were stunned. We were in a divania, a room right behind me, in fact, waiting for the daily speech of the leader of Ansar Allah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And guess who enters our room? Out of the blue, the military spokesman of Ansar Allah, Yahya Sari, which is a face all over the world recognized as the face of Ansar Allah and the face of the Houthis. A room like a thing. In fact, it's still going on, Judge. In a room like not far from where I'm talking to you now, with a former prime minister.
Okay, what I want to point out here is that what Mike Walt said is that strike was designed to decapitate the Houthis. So Pepe goes, okay, and travels there. It's what, a week and a half to 2 weeks later? Okay. And he's about to watch a broadcast, from, al-Houthi himself. He talks to a former prime minister who's still extremely powerful. And he met, with the Yahya Saree, who is the voice of the Houthis to the rest of the world. Who every time the Houthis make an attack, we see this guy get on there and just talk very fast and very loudly and very positively, using a lot of religious language. Okay, and we see this guy who looks halfway like a comic figure, but after you realize after a while, he's actually very, very serious and very, very proud of what his group is doing. And so Pepe is there, and he's going to meet with this guy. Okay, so at least 3 prominent leaders of the Houthis were not decapitated.
On Israeli ships or ships delivering whatever that is to Israel, or ships who are helping Israel one way or another. And they say, look, and now that we restarted because the ceasefire was broken by Israel, if they stop with the ethnic cleansing project and the starvation of Palestine, we also stop it. The day before, very, very important. Yesterday, I was talking to another guy very, very high up in the political council here. I asked him point blank, do you have privileged channels of communication with China and Russia? He gave me a response that was fascinating because it was lost in translation, of course, but the bits and pieces that I could pick up, he was saying basically in metaphors that, of course we do, but we'll never advertise this to anybody. And the Russians and the Chinese know exactly what the US and Israel are up to in Palestine and against the axis of resistance. And of course, there are very close relations between Russia and China with certain vectors of the axis of resistance. And they understand that this is a much bigger war. They understand the full forever wars ethos when you think about US-Israel against the axis of resistance. And the people here in Yemen, they are very sophisticated. I was very, very impressed. Everybody that we talked to. And
do they have an understanding of why the Trump administration is trying to kill them?
No, because they cannot explain it. And because there is no rational explanation. And this so-called leak today only confirms to them that the whole thing is absolutely irrational. To send them, just like that, to send a message. They're not a threat. But anyway, let's do it because we can. A typical imperial attitude, right? But you are messing with a nation of warriors. This is very, very serious. Yesterday, something absolutely extraordinary happened. We were stunned. We were in a divania, a room right behind me, in fact, waiting for the daily speech of the leader of Ansar Allah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And guess who enters our room? Out of the blue, the military spokesman of Ansar Allah, Yahya Saree, which is a face all over the world recognized as the face of Ansar Allah and the face of the Houthis. It was an immense risk for him to come here and visit a group of foreigners in a hotel.
Is that him there with you?
No, that's another guy, Judge. This was the guy that I was referring before. This is the guy from the political council where I asked the Russia-China question. Right. Yahya Saree is the guy that we see every day all over the world. One of my friends here, Professor Ma from Huanzhou, he told me that Yahya Saree is immensely popular in China because the Chinese support the Yemenis. And there are instances of the relationship between China and Yemen coming back from Mao times. They took us, for instance, to an obelisk written in Chinese and in Arabic, paying homage to the Chinese workers who died here in Sana in construction works in Maoist times. So this goes back a long time. And part of our conversation a few minutes ago, he was telling us of the relationship that the Yemenis had with Nasser's army, for instance, and the fact that a lot of top students from Yemen, they studied in Soviet and Chinese universities. So this explains why these people, they can build a hypersonic missile. And if our friend Hegseth doesn't know any of this, oh my God, the U.S. is in really, really bad shape.
I think the U.S. is in really bad shape. I mean, you'll see the transcript of this, or not this, these conversations, and it's almost high school like.
It's high school, exactly. It's high school, and I would say that this high school concerning their how unprepared they are to understand Yemen mirrors the high school of certain elements they are negotiating with Ukraine and Russia as we speak. The same
Now,
thing.
where are you there? It looks like there's about 2 dozen microphones in front of you.
No, because this was the first day of the conference, and each of us, we had like 3 minutes for a short speech. And they took this photo while I was finishing my speech. And yes, everybody was there, Judge. CCTV, you know, RT, Press TV from Iran, etc. Yes, this is one of the pictures of the old city, which is, look, I've been to all the souks in the Middle East over the last 40 years. It's the most beautiful ancient city and souk in the whole Arab world. It's something absolutely extraordinary. And that's why this morning I wanted to go there by myself. And I'll keep going in the morning or late at night by myself, just to walk the streets, feel the atmosphere. And you can talk to many of the merchants. So many of them speak at least the basics of English. It's fascinating. This is a group of boys. These are a group of Yemeni boys in the hood, dressed Yemeni style. with their dagger in the right place, right?
And who are these fellas?
Basically, some of them are dancers, some of them are artists, and we're gonna see a lot of them on Friday, this coming Friday, because there's going to be another one of those 1 million marches where they gather together to express their support for Palestine.
Now, what is this one of gathering? It looks like there's 1,000 people behind you, Pepe.
More, even more, Judge. This was on the first day of the conference, where our small group was sitting here in front, and these are militants, diplomats, intelligence officers, university students, you name it. And this was the first day of the conference where they gave the word, the floor, essentially to our small group of foreign. We are like maybe 11 or 12, including Professor Ma from China.
If you were to ask those people if they believe that Donald Trump is a man of peace, how would they react?
Obviously, considering the actions of the United States vis-a-vis Yemen so far, obviously not. But they don't make comparisons. It's a very different reasoning. They are extremely gracious, polite, understanding. They love to listen to points of view from other parts of the world. For instance, we have a Bolivian friend here, very close to Evo Morales. They are absolutely fascinated by everything that comes from Latin America. We have Professor Ma, who's a Muslim, a Hui, a Muslim from China, who speaks fluent Arabic on top of it. Obviously, he's treated like a superstar here, you know. So they know how to gather people from different parts of the world who understand not only how they are implicated in the Palestinian struggle, but their own struggle, because they were being bombed literally until yesterday by the Saudis and by the so-called coalition. The so-called ceasefire the Saudis had to sign the ceasefire because they were being destroyed by the Yemenis. So in terms of their military power, it reflects directly their spiritual strengths, their moral character, their moral clarity, which is something that we understand when we talk to them. It's very, very impressive. These people are models of rectitude, and they want to be on the side of the good, on the side of the communal good, which is something that in the West, as we all know, which is the reign of postmodernist narratives, disappeared completely. So when you come here, you are literally in another planet. And it's very fulfilling for all of us. We are learning so much, and our agenda during the day is absolutely crazy. We go all over the place, and I'm lobbying in very, very hard to go to Hodeida, but they tell me that it's extremely dangerous at the moment because Hodeida is being bombed by the Americans practically every day. They are cowards. They only bomb at night. But even to go there during the day, we still trying to convince the security people, look, let's go. We stay 1 hour, 2 hours. We talk to some people. We see the port, and we come back during the day before sunset. So I hope that's going to happen.
Do they share your view and mine and those of the people watching now that the United States is bombing them as a favor to the Israelis?
Yeah, essentially, yes. The attitude of the new presidency in the United States is viewed here essentially as a favor to Israel. And that redoubles their drive to defend Israel as best as they can. For instance, can you imagine anybody on the planet who has the balls to declare a blockade of Ben Gurion Airport in Israel? They do it. And they launched their hypersonic missile on top of it.
And do they succeed?
Yes. The problem is, Judge, obviously, military information here, especially for us foreigners, is very, very difficult to obtain. For instance, I asked specifically about the mechanism, their decision mechanism in terms of coordinating their political bureau with the top of the Yemeni armed forces. They decide when they're going to strike, who they're going to strike, with what kind of missiles, weaponry, etc. I didn't get a straight answer. I'm going to keep trying during this week.
All right,
but
Pepe, if you want to come, if you want to come back on with us later in the week, if you have breaking news, if you have a revelation, if you have a story you want to tell us, just reach Chris and we'll put you on again, my dear friend.
Friday, Judge, after that famous 1 million march.
You
definitely,
got it.
Definitely.
We'll work it out. Thank you very much for your time. Please be safe and stay well, my dear friend.
The internet was not very good, so.
No, the internet is fine. A little bit of a delay, but it's fine. Thank you, Pepe.
Exactly.
God bless you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Sure.
So, I tried to comment as little as possible on that because just his experience there reflects, I think, on the ignorance we have, okay, of that place and, in that country. And he brought a personal perspective of his experiences, which I think is valuable to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And we will get more from him on Friday. Have you any comments, Dee, about this?
I thought it was very informative, and I did like when he went into the personalities of the people he met and getting to know them better. he really, created a good picture.
Yes, I thought he created a good picture. Okay, I also thought that he gave the lie to the idea that the United States is being successful in decapitating the leadership of the Houthis. There's no evidence at all that that is going on. Okay,
Yeah.
instead of attacking military targets, we seem to be attacking residential areas there, which is what we often do. And those are not the same, okay, as the military targets. I think they don't know where the military targets are.
No.
They know where some of the warehouses are, but I think they just don't know about, the military targets there. Okay, but I thought that what Pepe said about the motivation of their people in standing with the Palestinians, was important.
Yes.
And his obvious enthusiasm for the culture was also quite important. When we look at the article, okay, and the various videos that we've covered today, okay, I think we learn that what Putin is doing now, what Trump is doing now, is taking a big risk to the peace talks with Russia, and Putin, and that this is not a wise risk, because much is to be gained by normalizing with Russia. And the whole business of starting with attacks on the Houthis in order not only to crush them, but to send a message, just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think it's going to introduce any caution, on the part of the Iranians. I think it's just going to stiffen their resistance, because the whole thing seems so unjust. Also, when you place it in the context of the Israelis are committing a genocide, we, of course, are helping them to commit this genocide, and we're trying to attack the only nation that is actively contesting the genocide, specifically Yemen, the only nation that is currently doing something really concrete to try to stop the Israelis, from doing the genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And we are claiming freedom of navigation is our excuse for putting them down. But the reason why we want to trade to put them down is nothing more than we want to support the Israelis, that we're defending the genocide. This is against international law. The Houthis are acting consistently with international law. Perhaps they're the only nation that has really stood up. And we are backing the side of injustice.
Right.
And the side that's working against the international laws that we helped to set in place following the Second World War. We also learn from Ray McGovern that this is not a well thought through situation by Donald Trump. It's part of his normal blustering style, and that it's unlikely that he will continue with it, because in the end, he will get information from the Defense Department and the intelligence services that will inform them how costly this course of action really is. Not simply the attack on the Houthis, but using the Houthis to send a message to the Iranians. And in Scott Ritter's video, we learn about how foolish, from a military standpoint, this whole thing is, and how lacking in information Trump and his leadership team are concerning what the Houthis are about, concerning our own capabilities, concerning how foolish it is to be pursuing this particular course of action. And then from Pepe, we get a personal perspective on the kind of people and the kind of culture that we are attacking with our bombs right now. And this is about the first time that we've gotten a personal perspective on it, because we haven't seen other journalists who have gone there to conferences and who have come back with reports of the kind we just got from Pepe. So hopefully this will resolve itself soon, that Trump will come to realize that he's barking up the wrong tree, that he'll go back to negotiating peace with Russia and Putin, and that as part of the overall peace framework they set out, that this will extend to West Asia too, and that Putin will be able to persuade Trump to leave off of any attacks on Iran, and that he will be able to persuade Trump that the only course for Israel is to stand down from the genocide, and perhaps this will be facilitated by the internal events in Israel that are going on right now. So what I've been doing here is summarizing the significance of the stream and the significance of these videos and the larger meaning of these videos. Dee, any further comments on this?
I thought this was a really good show. I really like listening to the different perspectives and listening to what others have to say, and it fills us in more, as with the analysis and details and perspectives.
Right, and also some of the videos are full of facts.
Yes, they are.
And it's important for us to know those facts.
Right, and it's just too much. We knew it was going to be a problem with the people Trump, put in his cabinet, and especially Hegseth. He doesn't know what the heck's going on.
Right, but also Michael Waltz. I mean, he doesn't know what's going on.
No, he doesn't.
And J.D. Vance, he doesn't have a clue.
No.
We talk about J.D. Vance, he doesn't have a clue. I think the only member of his team who might have a clue is probably Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
She might have a distant clue. she might at least be willing to listen to the views of Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern, and Pepe Escobar.
Yes, because she is more open-minded to, listen to different perspectives. We've seen her history with that.
Yes, she has a history of doing that. And that's the value of having her in there. But she is literally the only good appointment in foreign policy that Trump has made.
Right.
I mean, it's really, really, really bad.
Right, because a lot of it was based on this loyalty to Israel and not realizing that there's a big world out there.
It's a big world out there. We learned some other surprising things. One thing Eva Lerner learned is that the relationship with the Mao regime surprised me. Also the Soviets. And she asks, whether the Yemenis have a socialist regime in place. I don't know. I've never really heard that. Okay, I think it's a traditional Islamic regime. Okay, it's more communal, and in that sense, it's closer to socialism. But I don't think it's like the Ba'athist regimes in Iraq and Syria. No, I don't think it's like those at all. It's far more religious. It's also Shia. So it's probably more similar to the Iranian regime. Or does the regime have a socialist nature? I'd answer that by saying it has a communal nature. In part, it has a tribal nature. Okay, I think the Houthis were actually a tribe. And they were basically tribal leaders. Sherry says, very interesting show. Evelyn says, nice to have an update on Syria. Maybe introduce Eva Bartlett to the show. And she is an expert in this country. She is an expert. I don't even know how to get a hold of Eva Bartlett. But she is maybe the leading expert. Sherry Y says, how much influence do you think Tulsi might have on Trump? Well, okay, I understand that the approach she is taking to Trump is just the approach of delivering the facts to him each day without trying to varnish them, without trying to direct him, just trying to fill him in on what the significant facts are that he needs to know. Of course, she'll be selecting the facts because there's always, selection of the facts. But I think it will probably be an honest, selection of the facts in the sense that she'll be trying to reveal whatever she thinks will be significant for his decision making. I think she'll be trying to gain his confidence by not trying to influence his decision making, in any kind of direct way, by consciously just arranging the facts and trusting to him to make a decision that is sensible. I think that job is going to wear on her because I think he often is irrational. But I think that she will trust to the facts as she sees them, and that then she'll let him decide himself. And I think when he sees that style, when he sees that he's working with that kind of style. He's not working with someone trying to manipulate him or trying to constrain him, but just trying to support his decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the best that we can ask for. And I think in that situation, he will become more cautious about foreign policy and will begin to weigh the actual facts as she is able to deliver them to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the others on his team will begin to hate her, because I think the Marco Rubios and the Michael Waltzes, okay, and the Sebastian Gorkas, and some of the others are going to want to manipulate him, because they all have agendas. But I think her agenda is just to give him the facts and allow him to make the decisions. So in that way, she might have a great influence on Trump, because the facts might have a great influence on Trump. If he is to abandon this whole project of going after the Iranians at this point and going after the Houthis, okay, at this point, it will be the facts that Tulsi presents to him that maybe gets him to decide that that is not the right thing to do in this particular situation. So I hope he keeps on talking to her. She's supposed to be in the position of giving him a daily briefing. I hope that he decides he wants to continue to get that particular daily briefing. He's notorious for not wanting to be briefed. So I hope that he will sit still for the briefings.
Yes, he really does. This is crucial. These are critical times.
And these are critical times, and for him to absorb the reality that he is facing in West Asia,
Mm-hmm.
and the reality he is facing with Putin as well, and with the strength of Russia, he has to come to understand the military facts, the Iranian military facts, the Russian military facts, the Chinese military facts. He has to come to understand what the hegemon is facing if it tries to maintain itself as the hegemon. I know he's got some ideas that suggest he's willing to accept that we're not going to be the hegemon any longer. But his own personal inclinations are to be the hegemon
Mm-hmm.
over things. I think he was ready to accept that we were not going to be the hegemon in Eastern Europe, and we're not going to be the hegemon with respect to Russia. But I don't know if he's accepted yet that we can't be the hegemon when it comes to West Asia, because the forces, are arrayed against us there, and they are very powerful forces, more powerful than the combination of ourselves and Israel. We have the power to destroy there, but we don't have the power to create a peaceful future for the region. For that to happen, the United States and Israel are going to have to collaborate with other nations that have a stake in what happens to the Middle East. That's what Trump has to come to realize. Of course, he'll still want to be the hegemon over North and South America. And there's going to be a lot of angst over that, even if he is willing to withdraw from that position for the Middle East. He's still going to want to be the person sitting on top of the Monroe Doctrine. And that is dangerous too. But that struggle is probably down the road. The first struggles are over Eastern Europe and West Asia. So that's what I see. On that note, I think it's time to say goodnight. It's 12:09 a.m.
Well, yes, it's time to say goodnight. Good night, Bonnie.
Time to say goodnight.
Night. Or what did Lawrence Welk do? Good night. Sleep tight.
Okay, good night, Dee. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Good night.
It was a pleasure. And thank everyone else too. Thank you, Sherry. And Evelina, thank you very much. And thank you, Joe Logan, for your comments, and Steve Wolfbrand. And thank you, everyone who's still here but hasn't commented. Thank you, Earl of Laurel. And on that note, Bonnie and I will say goodnight.